Welcome to the Holistic Career Change Podcast. Spoiler alert, we don't discuss conventional, linear, boring career change here. This is the place where we talk about finding an aligned career path that feels like an extension of who you are, where you get paid for being yourself. Forget personality quizzes, soul-crushing scrolling on job sites, and breaking your brain trying to find your why. Join me and many other career changers who've changed their career holistically by first defining who they are at their core and then using this blueprint to design a fulfilling career or business. We use the mind-body-soul approach, and we take into consideration the complexity and multidimensionality of all that you are and want to represent in the world. This is where purpose-led careers are born and built. I'm your host, Vilma Oseita. Let's go. Hello, friends. How are you doing? Happy Thanksgiving to those of you who celebrated last week and who are listening to this episode real time. I cannot believe this year has come to an end. Again, the timelines are collapsing and the time is going so fast. I've been feeling it personally a lot lately, actually, when it comes to time. And I've been sensing this deep urge to check in and be brutally honest with myself and really answer what is working and what is aligned in my life and what is not working anymore and what should be let go of and where is the dead weight, literally and figuratively speaking, because nothing is guaranteed and tomorrow is not guaranteed. And hopefully that doesn't sound too depressing, but I feel like while we are here, I think we should be very, very intentional with what we do and what we choose to vote for with our energy, with our attention, with our effort, with our time, with our money, and also just the literal votes when it comes to the people who we want to represent us. Don't worry, I'm not going to get all political on you. That's not usually my vibe, but I feel like intentionality and really checking in kind of is the theme of this podcast, or one of the themes of this episode as well, because today I really want to introduce a very, very special guest star of the episode, Nina, my client, who decided to be very vulnerable and share the behind the scenes of her career change journey. I feel like Nina's story is in many ways very unusual and unique because of the way that it unfolded and how she ended up finding her aligned career, which included a very personal, heartbreaking life event that pretty much forced her to pause, to evaluate, to reconsider what she wants, who she is, and also what's the meaning of it all. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here because she's going to be talking about it herself in the conversation that you're about to listen to. So while her story is unusual, I also feel like the fears and the different stages and the dilemmas and inner conflict that she experienced along the way in her transition is actually something that many of us career changers will be subjected to, whether we want it or not, because each of those challenges do serve a very unique purpose. So in this episode, Nina will be sharing what it felt like for her working in real estate and how, in spite of the potential in the industry, she still was struggling to show up for it, and it was feeling very misaligned for her. She will share more about that personal experience that happened to her in her personal life that turned out to be a catalyst for change, not only in her personal life, but also her career. Nina is also sharing a very, I would say, different perception of grief and how to transmute it. And by transmute, she means how to alchemize our grief. And if you're curious what it means, you need to listen to the episode because I really see her as, in a way, a thought leader offering a much needed, new, deeper understanding of grief and how to reimagine it. Nina also will be talking about those moments of peace and lightness and expansion that she finally gets to feel now that she is walking a more authentic and a more aligned life. And there's going to be so much more. Honestly, I kind of struggle to summarize this episode because I feel like every other sentence that Nina was saying could become a quote. Okay, that's how good it was, because she has so much wisdom to share. And I even said it in the recording to her. I get mesmerized listening to her because it feels like I'm talking to a sage who contains eons of insights and deep understanding of life. So my sincere hope is that you will enjoy this episode and you appreciate this grounding and healing energy that Nina has, and you can find some inspiring learnings to take away. Enjoy. Hello, Nina. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Vilma. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. I also know that your full name is not Nina. Can you share with the listeners what your full name is? I'm not always good at pronouncing it.
It's okay. That's why I go by Nina. My full name is Najalis Rodriguez.
Najalis.
Yes, and I go by Nina.
Where does the name come from? Is it Puerto Rican?
So I've been told, I'm from Puerto Rico, but I've been told that name has Russian origins, is what I've been told, like Nadja.
Ooh. And Nadia. Maybe Nadia. Yeah. Ooh, love it. That's a unique name. Okay, cool. So as per usual, let's just start with you briefly introducing yourself, whatever you feel comfortable with sharing.
Sure. So I am now the creator and host of the Grief and Light podcast, where we talk about grief and life openly and authentically. And I have also, I now provide one-on-one grief support via my virtual monthly meetups and through personal one-on-one sessions. We can talk about more how I got there a little bit later. I consider myself a multi-potentialite, a loving sister, wife, friend, and overall just a person unlearning and unbecoming so that I can realign with my purpose, which was the main goal here, how we got together.
Love that. Where do you reside? Where are you from?
I'm currently in Miami, Florida.
Okay. And I know that you're also thinking of perhaps relocating. We don't have to share about that, but I'm just so excited about that move for you.
Yes. So I've been dreaming about relocating to Spain. My husband and I took a trip there last year and absolutely fell in love with it, as one does with Europe in general.
Yeah.
But in all practicalities, I think it's just, I really fell in love with the healthier lifestyle and the walkability and just the general lifestyle over there. So fingers crossed, we'll see if we'll make a move. Maybe next interview, next time we check in, maybe I'm in a different place.
Oh my goodness. I hope so. I think you will. Okay. So let's start from the very beginning. I love the beginning of the journeys. And obviously I haven't known you for your whole life, but I've known you since you came in, since we had that first call. So I'd love for you to share a little more with the listeners. What was happening in your life then? How did you feel? What was going on? Why did you feel like you needed maybe some support, or what were you looking for? Just share whatever comes, like what that felt like to be Nina back then when you reached out.
That's a really good question. So I was a totally different person, to be honest. By the time I reached out to you, I was struggling with who I was, where my life was heading. I was very disconnected from myself, my purpose, what I was doing. I was completely burnt out. Just for reference, I worked in real estate here in Miami, and it had been 4 years. So I reached out to you at the end of last year. That was December. And it had been 4 years of just utter stress, starting with the death and passing of my brother, my only sibling. It was very unexpected. That was 2019, towards the end of it. And then right after, we had the pandemic, which I don't have to go into. Everybody was affected by it, but it was very life altering. And then, it really impacted the real estate world here in Miami as well. And everything just became very hectic, chaotic. And as time went by, from the moment my brother passed, as the years went by, I felt less and less connected to the work that I was doing. I felt less and less connected to everything. Just didn't feel aligned. It felt very misaligned. My energy was very scattered. I was very stressed out. And I felt myself being drained and energyless as time went by. So I realized I had to change something, and I've pivoted careers before. So this is not new to me, but it's always been very reactive. So whereas this time I said to myself, I want this to be very intentional. I don't want to keep pivoting. I don't want to keep being reactive. I want to be very intentional. And so in December of last year, I said my word for 2023 is aligned. I want to be aligned. And as a side note to that, I also want clarity. And clarity is at the time when you feel so disconnected, when somebody says, okay, great, but what is it that you want? It's very difficult to say what that is, to give it a name, because you're not connected to yourself. So when I searched for, what kind of person could help me with this, and is it a career counselor, or is it like who helps people with this? And I remember I think I was scrolling on Instagram, and I came across this post that said something about grief and career change. And it was the first time that two words were put together in a post that I didn't create in terms of what I was feeling. It captured what I was feeling. And I think, so I clicked on it, I see your profile, and I say, oh my gosh, this person gets it. Who is she? Like, who is this person? And I start reading through the post, and the way that you explain career change. And I think that particular post was just more grieving who you were as you changed careers. So it wasn't necessarily grief related to the loss of a person, but it's the first time that I saw somebody addressing this topic in a way that it resonated with my reality. And I said, let me look into this person a little bit more. And that's essentially how I connected with you. I saw your profile. I scheduled a call. I said, why not? Let me see what she has to say. And the rest is history.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Thank you for sharing. That's really interesting for me to hear as well. And I think seems like you were in a tough, well, first of all, you're really well spoken, as the listeners can tell, and you have a podcast, shameless plug. But I feel like you also are so well spoken, and you always present yourself well, that at that point when we connected, I think for me what was interesting is that you presented so in control, yet your energy was very much like, Jeremy, like scattered and confused and not grounded. And it was very interesting for me to experience that kind of like mismatch. And as we started working together, I think you also shared that was very much also what you used to do in that previous life, right? Like no matter what was happening, you would always present well. Can you share a little more about that? Because that's really interesting to me.
I love this question. I think that was something that you mirrored back to me that I didn't realize I was doing. And this is something I saw after a few weeks of working with you. But it has been, I want to say maybe the point that has helped me understand the operating mechanism of how I was showing up in the world. So I was very type A. I was very leading from my masculine. If you met me back then, even though I was feeling so scattered and, all the things I described earlier, I presented very secure. I presented like there was nothing wrong. Like I got everything handled. And in a way I did, because I wouldn't show anybody that, things were going crazy behind the scenes, but here I am solving problems. I will always be there for my clients. I will always do the right thing. I will always get it solved, et cetera, et cetera. But it was very much at my expense. So the only way that I knew how to show up was this very well together person who has everything figured out, even if she doesn't. And I know that inspires confidence, but at the same time, there was a lack of congruency with who I really was and what I was feeling. I'm not to say that I wasn't those things, but I was only leading with those things. And at the end of the day, I learned through our exercises and through our process that it's okay to also lead, to honor the vulnerable side of you and the more feminine and soft side of you, and that can also be powerful. And that was a new concept for me, because I only understood like business is run one way and one way only. And I'm learning that no, it is not. There are multiple ways to run business. There are multiple ways to show strength. And often those don't look like what we've been taught they look like. Mm-hmm. So that was a big one for me.
Yeah, so good. I think so many of us type A's resonate with that. And that's why I think we can look high functioning and sometimes even successful in many fields, but that is not a representation of how we actually feel. So I love that you shared. Another aspect that I love to, if you don't mind sharing, was I think that so many listeners can relate to, especially as females, was you kind of used your age against yourself at the beginning a little bit, where you're putting so much pressure. Like, I'm at this point, I should have either figured it out by now, or I have a week or like a month to figure it out. Otherwise, like, I'm failing. This is all collapsing. Remember that at the beginning it was a thing. Do you mind sharing more about that?
Absolutely. And I giggle at myself at the thought of where I was back then, because so at the time I reached out to you, I was 38. I'm now 39. It was only a few months after that I turned 39. And so there's something about that 40 milestone right around
Looming
the corner.
40.
It's like, ooh, new decade, what's going to happen? And you're quote unquote supposed to have all these things figured out by then. You're supposed to know what you want. You're supposed, this ambiguity and this sense of, gosh, I feel like I have to start over on some level is socially, do I want to say unacceptable? It's maybe frowned upon, or seen as unreliable or unstable, or at least those were the words that were swirling in my mind when I was thinking about this career change. And I was like, oh, do I want to be perceived like that? That sounds like a weakness to me. And I use these very harsh words against myself. So yes. And then I also, it made me giggle because I also remember when you asked me, more or less like, what kind of timeline do you have in mind for this process? And I was like, oh gosh, 3 months, it should be more than enough. By March, I want to have my new career so that I can start making a profit by summer and all this stuff. And you were like, oh, well, anything's possible, but the process, in my experience, there's a lot, the undoing process and the unlearning process has a timeline of its own. And it's usually not 3 months. And I'm giggling because knowing what I know now, that probably sounded so bizarre to you at the time.
Well, I mean, yeah, like, we're overachievers and I've seen quick career change. So I never would say like, no, that's not going to happen. However, like to your point, when you see so many journeys unfold, you're like, yeah, like no matter what even if I went with you and kind of created this like tangible 3 month plan, I know that the way that things will happen is the way things are meant to happen. And they're going to happen at the pace and change that you as a client need.
Yes.
Right?
And one thing that I want to highlight is when we started, I remember thinking, oh, she's going to ask me about my resume and she's going to help me put this together and blah, blah, blah. And I remember one of the first things you asked me was like, how's your water intake? And how's your nervous system? And I was like, I'm sorry, what part of my resume is that? And what I realize now is that those are the fundamental questions if you ever want to change anything fundamentally, because
Yeah.
you cannot get ahead of your nervous system. You cannot regulate your life with an unregulated nervous system. That's something that I learned from you. And if we don't take care of those very essential functions, the rest, you may as well just waste your time and money. Like, it doesn't matter. So they're first things first. And it was so, sometimes the biggest change in life starts with very simple steps that
Mhm.
seem unrelated, but they're completely related. And I remember when you encouraged me to, step out in nature. And, I live in Miami. We have beautiful beaches and beautiful parks and all these things. And I literally have them about 5 minutes from where I live. Ask me if I ever went there on a regular basis, because I'm just like, oh, we have to work and we have to do this and we get in our routine. So when you said basically stop and smell the roses kind of thing, you didn't say that, but it's that concept of stop, smell the roses, allow nature to help co-regulate you, go on these walks, drink your water, regulate your sleep, and then we'll talk about what needs to change in terms of work.
I love this so much. Thank you for sharing. Because again, like if we skip those steps, and I know that they're not sexy, as someone who loves quick change, and I always talk about it on my podcast, if it was up to me, I would have everyone change their career in a week because I too like my results. Hello, thank you. However, my job is to make sure that whatever we do is sustainable, is aligned, and that is a different approach. And if we skip some of those fundamentals, including thought work, which we'll talk about, is like you're building sandcastles. So you get excited, you may start building, but then the next time the wave crashes, your castle is gone. And I think so many of us are stuck in that where we're like a little unrealistic. We're not even sure. Sometimes we don't know we're dysregulated. This is like the pace of life these days. We are so used to this. We don't even know we're living in that. So when we pause and start evaluating, we're like, oh my goodness, it's so different when you do things differently. And sometimes there's resistance, right? Where it's hard to keep to these habits, even if they're helping you.
And I am nodding. Yes, I'm absolutely nodding. And it's all connected because your body, people underestimate how involved your body is in the process of change. A lot of people think like, oh, career change is just this thing I have to do with my resume or, training or this and that. It really begins with your nervous system, and your nervous system, if you get ahead of it, if you act in a way that it perceives threat, which is something that I also learned from you. If it's something that it perceives threat, then it's like you said, you're building sandcastles. You might get that job, and next thing you know, you won't last at all. You will not have the endurance because you got ahead of your nervous system. And you need to make things safe through these tools that you share with your clients, like the thought work, which I have a love-hate relationship.
Don't we all?
I love and hate it. But it's so helpful. It is really so helpful.
Yeah. Love it. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Let's talk a little bit about that. Because you already shared with the listeners that what you're doing right now. Let's talk a little bit about your path towards grief coaching and how you found yourself there. Because it wasn't a linear journey. It was a little bit of back and forth, just as per usual. So I'd love for you to, wherever you want to start, and then we can kind of, chip in both of us to kind of see what you remember, what I remember. How did that unfold? How did you find yourself in this path?
So it started when my brother passed. He was my only sibling. So the person that I usually would be able to talk to about a very tough life circumstance would be my brother or my parents. And in this case, they're dealing with their own loss of their son. So that support system was no longer there. Obviously, my brother's not there. My husband has been an angel in that regard, but he can only take so much, understandably. And I was left with all of these emotions that I didn't know what to do with, and they were literally consuming me and no outlet. So how this ties into grief work is that I, at the time, without knowing anything, without any plans, created this Instagram account where I would post this experience because when I looked for support online, whether through counseling or this, there wasn't anything that I saw would like resonated enough for me to be like, yes, I'm going to sign up for that. I was like, where is the support for people in this situation? Like, where is it? And so I created this Instagram account and I started sharing the reality that I was living. More than anything, I wasn't talking to anybody specifically. It was more than anything just to experience it outside of my mind and body. I needed to put this energy out there somewhere and see if anybody else could understand. Before I knew it, that account grew. And it was a lot of people in the same circumstances saying, yeah, me too, me too, me too. And so I connected with a network of people from literally all over the world. I didn't post my face at the time, so it was very anonymous. They didn't know who I was. I didn't share my name. It was literally just the experience. And so the account grew, and that became my outlet, and that became my support system in a way. One thing led to another. I discovered grief groups, sibling grief groups, et cetera, et cetera. So that started showing me that was the beginning of the path, right? And in terms of how I got to actually making it something I want to dedicate myself to. So through the months really that we did all these exercises, from thought work to whoever's worked with Vilma knows there's a section where you could just put what did we call it? The area where we could just put everything that we think of career-wise.
Ideas bank. Ideas bank.
The ideas bank. I'm sorry, I lost the word there for a second, but the ideas bank. And I kept everything. So many of the things that I put on there had to do with helping people and the psychology of things and being of service. And it's something that I was not aware of at the time. I've been naturally, I remember now looking back, it's like Steve Jobs says, you can connect the dots looking back, not necessarily in the moment. So looking back on it, in high school, I was nominated by my peers as a peer support specialist. I didn't even know what that was at the time, but it was like, oh, she's really good at helping people. So, hey, so they nominated me, and all throughout high school, that's something that I did because, to be honest, it's something that got me out of class sometimes when somebody needed help. So the motivation was a little different back then. But it was something that's innate in me, and I didn't see it, but I benefited from that back then. I have been supporting people in various roles throughout my career pivots, on my personal life. I've always been told, hey, you're a good listener. You make me feel grounded. Thank you for your energy. So it's funny how it's right in front of us sometimes. And yet we try to complicate things. And when I say we, it's really me. Like I at the time I was complicating things because I thought, hey, business looks like this, careers look like this. And anything outside of that is just, it doesn't make sense. And so Vilma from the get-go said, why don't, I could see this being a career. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, no, because that's not what careers look like. And so I battled that quite a bit. And I said, no, let's find something else. Let's find something else. And so you, with all your knowledge and grace, honored that part of me that wanted to discover an alternative path. And at the time, I even thought, well, real estate actually ticks off a lot of boxes. So maybe I just have to fall in love with it again. And we tried doing that for a little bit. And nope, it's like going back to an ex that you just double check and you say, nope, this is over. Like this is done. So after really, think like a maze, and I'm walking this maze and Vilma's like, it's this way. And I'm like, no, let me check out this other side. And it leads to a dead end. But, she just waits for me to get back on track. As I walk through my own personal maze, I realize it has been there in front of me all the time. This account became the place where I felt more expansive and at home and myself in the world because of the nature of the connections that I was having with people. And as time went by, I showed my face. I started interacting one-on-one. People got to know me. It was more than just an outlet. I started hosting grief groups. I started connecting, collaborating with other people. I started the podcast. It became an entity of its own. And next thing I know, and the entire time, by the way, as this is happening, I'm like, no, there's no way this could be a business. No. So it's already taking shape. And I'm like, no, there's no way. And then it just hit me like, I'm already doing the work. I am already doing the work. In the past 4 years, I have studied this, absorbed information about what it is, how it manifests, how people process, how misguided a lot of the information is, and it causes suffering. Like the pain of loss is always going to be there, but the suffering related to grief is because people don't understand it. It's the one experience everybody is going to have in common, which is the passing of their loved ones and their own passing. And yet nobody talks about it because it's scary. I get it. I have compassion for that. But just because it's scary doesn't mean that we should just avoid it, because that's where the pain comes from when, it's not if, it's when somebody goes through a situation, whether it's a relative or yourself. And it's a very painful and lonely experience because we don't have these tools. So that's something I'm going to change through open dialogue, through my account, through the interactions, through the one-on-one sessions. And I even, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's related. I had this, Vilma said that when you're on the right path, not only does it feel expansive, but there's these opportunities that and synchronicities that take place that happen so quote unquote easily, right? Like they're just flowy and they come together easily. And that's how everything has been with this work. I even got invited to speak at the University of Miami on grief and loss, and specifically the type of loss that I suffered through my brother's passing. And it was very powerful. It was very validating. And I said, gosh, here's a full circle moment. I used to work at the University of Miami in a political think tank 12 years ago. And here I am back showing up as my full self and my most authentic self. I didn't even try to plan this. Like, this just really happened. And here I am speaking to hundreds of people about this topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's very aligned. It feels very natural. And they're listening to me. They're actually listening to what I have to say. So it was a very validating and powerful experience.
Oh, so much. There's so much goodness in what you shared. What do you think was actually in the way for you to, because I think you're such a great story of what I often also share a lot. It's just like the answer is right in front of you. You're probably living it, but there are just these blocks and doubts and insecurities or conditioning that does not allow us to really embrace it or even see it, to your point, where you were like, oh, I really had to connect the dots backwards. And we can also share about the astrology reading that you had, which also wasn't so recent, but it also, I believe, helped to really solidify the path for you, or at least this next evolution of this path. So what do you think was in the way for you at the beginning when you even started the process?
Sure. So one, myself, my ideas of what things should look like. That was, I think, the biggest thing, because we have a mental map of what we think is okay and not okay. I had very, very black and white thinking in terms of it's this or that, no in between, which is ironic because I always preach about, oh, life is all shades of gray and blah, blah, blah. But I wasn't applying that to myself. And I was very, if it didn't 100% look like what I thought a business looked like, then it's not a business. And so there's no room, there's no flexibility in my thinking. There was no flexibility to explore. There was no flexibility to consider an alternative. And you did an episode in your podcast about the third option. The third option, there's option A, there's option B, and what's option C? Like, what is option number 3? And that is so powerful because it helps you see what you're not seeing. And sometimes it's what's evidently right in front of you. So that was very powerful. You also have a podcast episode on the messy middle, is it called? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the messy middle, and overindulging in decision, which is something that I do naturally, because sometimes when overthinking is an excuse to not take action because for whatever reason, whether you're not ready or avoiding it, whatever, but it's a sign that you need to do some work so that you can move out of the messy middle and into the next phase. All of this takes energy. It takes energy to be indecisive. It takes energy to avoid. It takes energy to do all these things. And to me, that's energy wasted. So why not take that same energy and move forward? And I'm not sure if I answered the question because I kind of got lost.
I think you did. I also forgot what the question was. I'm just in the moment sometimes in these episodes. I go to another realm. So I'm with you there. I think you did. Another piece that I want to ask you about is, you mentioned podcast as well, and sort of starting the podcast pretty early. And I remember one of the sessions when you just started recording and kind of got the idea, you just kind of you so quickly did it. I've seen so many of my colleagues sometimes wanting to start. I even have colleagues that literally to this day don't have a podcast, even though they started coaching the same time as me, but they're so terrified, scared. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of vulnerability in sharing yourself like that, right? And I think you had it a little bit as well, but it seemed just so natural and so flow. And I remember in one of the sessions you came and you go like, I don't remember last time I felt so alive. I don't remember last time I felt so like myself. It feels so easy and right. Can you share a little more about that? Because that's an experience not all of us get to experience even throughout our life ever.
So through the work that we did together, I discovered the magic of collecting data, right? And so in my mind, this resonated with me because of my black and white thinking. I attributed a sense of permanency to any action that I took. So if I were to say I'm going to do a career change, me in the past would have thought you need to go back to school, you need a certification, you need hours and hours of practice, and you need external validation, and then you can become this thing, whatever it is that you want to be, right? So that was my, if it's not this linear path, then it's not worth it, right? And then that's when I discovered, and that was paralyzing. Let me explain this. That was very paralyzing. And that's one of the mechanisms, operating mechanisms within myself that kept me stuck. There was this perfectionism keeps you stuck. So it sounds pretty. It sounds like a good thing. It is not. It is something that will prevent you from taking action. And I learned the concept of collecting data, which is essentially imperfect action forward. And as you move forward, you find your footing, you find your path, and it becomes more aligned and you get results. Every great achievement starts with those few steps, seemingly small and seemingly unimportant sometimes. But the concept of collecting data, is to be curious, to lead with your curiosity, to lead with my curiosity. And that is something that I could resonate with because I am a curious person by nature. I care about people. I'm very curious about learning new things and how people function and how this works. So leading with that, was very powerful. And it was trying things for the sake of trying them. Don't add a sense of permanency. Don't add the heaviness of perfectionism. Just play with this idea. And if you don't like it, shift and pivot, do something else. So as that relates to the podcast, I remember thinking, gosh, I have so much to say about this process, about grief, about the things I want to see change, the things I want to see acknowledged, the way that I feel this conversation should be led. So I decided to play with the idea of the podcast. It was exciting to put it all together and create this space where, out of curiosity, I wasn't in it for the numbers. I don't care how many people listen. It's more like, are the right people listening and can anybody resonate with it? So I started it, just the process of doing it, the process of finding the words and explaining and sharing this experience so authentically was very expansive for me. It felt so amazing. I was so excited. It made me, like you said, it made me feel alive, right? And I started doing one episode after the other. People started resonating with it. I had podcast guests join, and that's where a lot of other opportunities were born out of just me sharing this truth. And it's funny because I have people who asking me, and these are people that have had businesses for years and they've been doing similar work for years. And they said, gosh, but how did you, what are your qualifications to make this podcast? And I simply say, I just felt like it. Like there's no rules.
Love it. Love it. Well,
yes. I just felt like it and I dared to do it. What's your excuse? Why are you not doing it? There's room for everybody. You don't have to get it perfect. Your first attempt, your first iteration is not going to be perfect. And that's okay. That's the whole point. It's evolution, it's iteration, it's pivoting as needed, but from a place of empowerment, not a place of fear.
So good. I love it. And I think there are so many nuggets here. And I think one of the main ones as well, in addition, is I want the listeners who are listening to this, I really want to ask you as well, what sort of notions or rules or manuals do you have around career? Because that could be literally the very thing that's in a way of you opening up and pursuing something that's already really clear for you. And I think this process as well, I think is much more about determining what Nina said, I didn't ask for a resume. I never asked for a resume unless there is, your career change is applying for a new job. That's when we look at resume. But other than that, our job is really to discern and get to know who you are at your core and build aligned career around it versus decide who you want to become and then earn the title and earn the right to work in that field, which I think is how the more conventional system career market in general is built. And I think that notion sometimes is hard to process or is just unusual. And probably that's where you had the blind spot or no, this is literally there and it's easy and it's natural, but it can't be that. Or who am I to do this? To the point of what you said, right? And I think I want to share as well, even with that being so natural and easy and almost as was just there, all you needed to do is kind of take it, package it, and really commit to that. You still had doubts about, well, is this really grief for me? Is it going to be perhaps hard sometimes to hold space because it's a heavy topic? And full transparency, I've been told to Nina several times, I couldn't do it. No way. No way. I couldn't. It takes a certain person and groundedness and ability to hold so much space and not take this on fully to support people like that. Because especially at the beginning stages, I would say it's so intense and overwhelming, right? And it's latching onto everything around them too, so they wouldn't drown. So can you share with the listeners how you still had doubts, right? And how we were working through that?
One of my doubts was, if this has been my support system and I'm now shifting into a position of offering additional services, who's going to support me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can I have this and that? And through some of the work that we've done, I've realized, and with what I've learned about grief, is that grief is not this or that, it's this and that. Two things can be true at once. It's not a this or that world, it's a both and. And I think parting from that premise is very, very powerful. You can find support in the space and you can be of support in the space. And yes, it's very heavy. I've learned through the connections that I've made there that having very firm boundaries is extremely important, because you're not there to fix what cannot be fixed. You cannot fix loss. You cannot go back in time. You cannot undo. You cannot alt delete, like your life. It happened. The pain is going to be there. My job is not to fix it. Your job is not to fix it. Your job is to integrate it and to transmute everything that happens thereafter. If you wanted to, your job is to transmute it into your next iteration of life, whatever that looks like to each person. That process is a very powerful process. And I lean into that side of it. Whereas where I've found the beauty in all of this chaos, and it's the concept of, I was explaining it to my husband this way. It's because he's the same way. He's like, I can't do this. Like, I can't dip into that energy. But when you've suffered a loss, and when you are there in the loneliness, in the chaos, in the scattered pieces, and you find very little help, you start wondering why this is not more spoken of. Why is there no more? There should be more support. So I resonate with this. It's in my nature to help people. It's in my blueprint. But at the same time, you have to preserve your own well-being. And that looks like setting up very strong boundaries in very loving ways, and having certain parameters. And when somebody is in their full intensity, you bring them back to the main goal, which is not fixing. I feel like people feel like they need to fix and bypass the scary parts to get to the high vibes only state. And that's just unrealistic. Nothing is high vibe all the time. And the more you try to bypass these things and avoid them and not look at them, the longer they will linger. So transmuting, facing it, is a very powerful way to move forward, but that requires help. And the way that I was explaining it to my husband is, imagine, so I'm from Puerto Rico. We had Hurricane Maria. The island experienced Hurricane Maria in 2017. And I say that because I live in Miami. I was not in the island at the time. And it was utter chaos. But at the same time, in chaos, everything is stripped to its bare essentials. And there is no pretending. There's no mask. There's nothing. It's just whatever is left in its most authentic form. And that's when you see people coming together for very selfless reasons. And in a way, there's this beauty in chaos. And that's what I hang on to. It is beautiful to see. I was just leading a group this week, and it was beautiful to see how the beginning is always this emotional release. It's almost like they not to sound gross, but it's almost like a vomiting of emotions and dumping of emotions. And it's very raw and messy and chaotic. And, that's the energy that you create a space for, because it's so real. It's what they have inside. It's how they're operating in the world. And as we talk and share, and one person shares an experience, another, and as multiple people share, they all realize they're going through the same thing in different ways. And they start having empathy, and you start realizing it's not unique to you. The nuances are unique to you, but the experience is not unique to you. And you can do this. As hopeless as you may feel, you can move forward. There is a way forward. There is light. That's why it's grief and light. It's like one grieving person can be a beacon of light for another. And I lean into that aspect of it. And so by the end of the session, everybody can breathe a little bit easier and feel like, okay, I can try again tomorrow. And I think that is so needed in the world. We need people who can help you say, I can try again tomorrow. And tomorrow is better. And then the next day is better. And then the next day is better. Not always, not in a linear fashion. We have our highs and lows, and that's very normal. But if you look at the overall trend, it's a better trend. And it's there to ease the suffering, and it's there to help people find their way again.
So good. So good. I think they're just from that. I mean, I'm like, I want to work with you. I don't have a loss yet, but I want to reserve my slot for the future, please. Can I? Because you're right. I feel like what you're doing is that kind of, it's not spoken enough. Also, I haven't done enough research to say that, but you have, and you feel like if that is missing, that is missing. You are the voice of bringing it a little bit of that different, lighter, not necessarily lighter perspective, because to your point, I agree that whatever we resist persists. So if we want to bypass a lot of these heavy emotions, and this generation and like we're in era is guilty of that, chasing that toxic positivity and almost ignoring what the shadow side of pain or the shadow side of grief is really, it's a lot. Oh my goodness. Right. But with the right approach and with the right boundaries and understanding what the nature and the essence of grief, I think that's what you bring to the table to be able to do that. That's fantastic. And I guess that's how you ended up like grounding into this idea of like, I think there is something for me here. And like we said, again, I want to second to what you said is, you can also pivot. You can always add in different elements. You can always adjust. This is not you. I was talking to my group that I have now, and I was like, you're not selling your soul here. You're not like, you know what I mean? Like, this is not a marriage till death do us part. You can always adjust. And I think, if anything, the most successful practices, or if you look at it from a business perspective, pivot and change all the time, whether it's in response to the market, in response to their own evolution and where they want to go, right? Like, it's so normal. So it's safe for us to go there. And I think about you, when I listen to you speak about grief, I think is so unique and beautiful and strong. And I remember when you got a reading from Kat, who astrologer that I collab with, and I remember her getting really excited about your reading as well. She was saying, you're literally made for it. It's not only because, when we think about purpose a lot of the times is almost twofold. You have individual purpose of like, this soul is here to learn how to be in a relationship. And you have career kind of vocation piece from like, okay, you will probably find fulfillment in this. For you, very much we're like intertwined, where like your experience and who you're here to do will be intertwined with career. So like we said, who you already been in many areas of your life, you just didn't call yourself a coach, a supporter, a consultant, but also just a painful experience that you had with the loss of your brother uniquely equipped you for this path. And I find that a lot with people who are moving into healing fields, that often is the case.
Beautifully stated. Yes. Thank you. And thank you for bringing that part up. One thing, again, with the not attributing the heaviness of permanency, the only permanent thing, speaking of grief, is death. Like, once somebody is gone, they're gone. Right. So other than that, everything else is fixable and changeable and pivotable. That's not a word, but I just made that up. And when you say, I was afraid that I'm going to work in grief for the rest of my life, and what does that mean? And how's my life going to look like? And what the heck? And you said, no, this could be a door. This could be a door for whatever's next in your life. It's just a very natural door. And it's something that it's already in the works. It's already in motion, and it's already helping people. So when I looked at it like that, it empowered me to just take bolder action and really embody, not just in my mind. You play with the idea of, yeah, I guess I could be this, but that's completely different than embodying that and acting and from that place and helping people from that place where you identify with the role. Honoring that it could change at any time. Change is the only constant in life. Why are we not good at it? Right? Like, we need to get better at changing, at pivoting. That's more normal than being one thing for the rest of your life only. Changing and pivoting is more normal than I'm this one thing forever and ever and ever, amen, So I think when we shift that perspective and we say, let me use what's already working, what's in alignment to walk down this next chapter in my life at any age, at whatever age, it doesn't matter. And when you allow yourself to do that, it is so liberating. I wish for people to experience the lightness, the way that you could feel that you could breathe easier, the peace of walking in your authentic self and aligning with that. And there will always be doubts. I had doubts. And when I had that reading that you shared with me from Kat, she doesn't know me. She's never met me. I never spoke with her. She has no idea other than like my
You had two sentences that I shared with her about you. Yeah.
Right.
Her date of birth.
My date of birth.
Yeah.
And it was like she had known me my whole life. So there's some people that are, that don't believe in this stuff. That's okay. I respect people's beliefs. What I have found is that there is so much truth to it. It's a language of its own, and it's a roadmap, or at least some signposts showing you the way. Right. And when she shared the reading, and it was like, this is all literally written in the stars for you, quite literally. Your work, this experience. She even said you're somebody that's probably experienced a very significant death very close to you that is going to shape what you do for the rest of your life.
Oh, goosebumps.
Goosebumps. Yes. And I'm like, she doesn't know me. How did my birthday just say that to her? Right. So when you later shared what it was with her, and she's like, oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense. Right. But at the time she was not aware of this. So when that was such a powerful validation, that gave me goosebumps. And I was like, you know what, let's just play with this idea fully. And I say play because any change that's permanent starts with fun and play. And a lot of people think change has to be so serious, and we have to be so deliberate, and we have to be so disciplined. And yes, there's elements of that, but the leading force should be I keep using the word expansiveness, which is a word that you use as well, because that captures all of it. It's joy, it's fun, it's play. And a lot of people may ask, like, how could you feel joy in working in grief? There's a lot of joy in grief. And that's another thing I would like people to know. There's a lot you actually live when you process it, when you integrate it. You live so fully, you show up so fully. You don't see the sunrise or sunset the same way. It looks magical. Like life looks magical. The fact that we're here feels magical. And when you walk around like that, life becomes a whole other thing. Like it just becomes so beautiful. And there's beauty in these experiences. So, yeah, I went on a tangent there, but
no, that's perfect. I love it. I love so much for sharing how it felt. And I think that's another big point to make, that I think a big takeaway for those of you who are on this journey, no matter which chapter you're in, is don't be afraid to embrace what's easy and natural, because again, the way that we're conditioned from the time that we're little is that you need to work hard and be good at so many things, and change is hard and work is hard. And only if you work hard, you achieve success, which is true, right? You can be the most talented person, but if you don't put in the reps and don't show up, yes, it doesn't even matter. However, I think, and I read this quote, it's not even my quote. I read this quote somewhere yesterday in the book, which was work hard at things that come easy. And that's how you go to the top. Work hard on things that come natural and easy to you. And so many of us were trying to fabricate and look for this hardness. Like Nicole that I had on my podcast, those who listened, the woman used to run up the hill because everything her conditioning was life is not easy. Life is hard. So she would make choices unconsciously that would be hard. And so this is what you call beautifully unlearning of no, it doesn't. It's safe for me to embrace what's there and what's natural. So,
and go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to highlight something that's so powerful about what you just said. Just because it feels easy to you doesn't mean it's easy. Somebody else your easy is somebody else's uphill.
Yeah.
And like you said, you actually work so much harder, but it's joyous work. You're excited to get into this work. You can't wait to get into this work. So yes, it's work, but it's aligned work, and aligned work feels way different than uphill work. Uphill work is
So different.
not fun. The
Yeah.
other thing is examine your beliefs. Your belief system, conscious and especially the unconscious ones, are running your life. And when you said that somebody you work with said that, you have to work hard or something about work and being hard, right? That belief is driving her life. So if it looks easy, it's not worth it in her mind map or his or her mind map. So one that I had myself is in real estate. I had this learning that somebody taught me along the way, that you are here to solve big problems, right? Your job is to solve big problems. And one time I had the easiest transaction. This is actually the one that did me in. I had the easiest transaction. It was super smooth. Everything went perfect. And I'm arriving at the day of closing. This was one of the bigger commission checks. So I was making a lot of money off of this one. And I'm driving and I literally think to myself, gosh, this was so easy. Like, I almost feel unworthy of this money. Well, the universe said, okay, you feel unworthy of this money. Guess what I'm going to show you. So without disclosing too many details, the house ended up flooding on the day of closing, completely flooding, completely destroyed. And I had no words. I still have no words for what I saw that day. And I'm not saying that I created that, because I would never. What I am saying is sometimes the universe, life, shows you circumstances based on your beliefs. And I technically, quote unquote, had not solved a big problem in that transaction. And the universe said, cool, let me give you a really big problem.
Show big problem to solve.
Here's the biggest problem. So long story short, we solved it. It was saved. Everything ended up being fine, but it was the most stressful transaction of all, because I think we co-create our experiences. I think a belief system, I'm not saying my belief system flooded the house. It's not that literal. I'm saying things will show up in your life according to your beliefs.
Yes.
And so I shifted recently that belief, and I can lead from a place of my gifts can benefit other people and they can reward me accordingly.
Yes.
And they can feel easy.
Yeah.
Not everything is going to be easy. There's going to be situations that need to be managed. But the perspective shifted from, I need to solve big problems. Why? And you can solve big problems from your place of strength, not from a place of, oh, something's going to go wrong. It's this doom and gloom in the horizon.
Because I feel like so good. I love that you emphasize that, because I think like when you're in that space and more aligned space and you start shifting your beliefs, then when you have a challenge, like when you have something go wrong, like I already said it, I would see that as a challenge and an opportunity to grow, or universe is showing me something that is my next point, character, trauma, whatever it is to work on, right? So like I view that if it's a challenge, I don't view it like universe hates me and life is against me. Why does it always happen to me? A lot of us used to have those narratives. Right now you're like, how interesting. It keeps on happening. Or it's again, like, I wonder what, and even now in my sessions, I ask my clients, what do you think the universe wants to show you? And sometimes you get really defensive because you're like, what do you mean the universe is going to show me? It's just like that person is an asshole, right? Like we get into the story, which is not helpful. So I love that you emphasize that. And sort of on that, I also want to ask you, because you kind of started talking about beliefs, because I totally agree with like the universe is going to meet you where you are when it comes to the beliefs that you have, not your value, but what you think you're worth. Right. So like yes. Whatever we believe, this is what's going to become true. That's why it's so magical. We have the key, we have the answer, we can change our lives. So what were some of the maybe unexpected like realizations, or what, when you went through this journey, what were some of the takeaways and impact where you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming? And you mentioned some of them, right? Just like, is there something else that you want to share?
Yes. So a lot of it, along the lines of examining your beliefs, figure out what operating mechanisms are playing in your background, in your subconscious, in your mind map, because of how you were raised, the cultural norms, experiences, traumas, whatever. What has been crystallized and it's running in the background? Is that serving you or is that hindering you? And the way that I started to bring this to my awareness was through the thought work that Vilma taught me, which I love and hate. So the thought work is, there's two sides to it. There's, hey, this is the operating mechanism of how it actually is right now. And then there's a thought reframe. And the thought reframe is, how can we put this in a different way that is very true? So we're not spinning it. We're not, lying to ourselves. We're actually staying very true to what this represents, but here's an alternative way to perceive it, or a different perspective. And when you do that, that's a very powerful place. Like, because I had all or nothing thinking, black and white thinking, this is forever thinking, I didn't allow myself to make mistakes, or not even mistakes. I didn't allow myself to make decisions or changes or anything. So when I did the thought work, I realized there is inherent value and empowerment in being in the space of becoming. So becoming as a verb. You don't have to have this title and be this final product for you to serve people. You can be on your way to becoming and serve people, right? I think the key is to do it from a genuine place of caring. Yes, if you have to educate yourself on the matter, start doing that. Get the help you need along the way, but take the steps. And I feel like that has been pivotal. That has been so pivotal. You don't have to be this perfect product. We are never a perfect product. And that's just like the part of the journey. Just take the steps in this journey. I think I talked about I had some notes here, but looking at the third option, making things very safe in your nervous system, that's huge. And sometimes this is something that I had to learn for myself. My journey doesn't have to look like anybody else's journey. It rarely ever will, even if you follow a quote unquote traditional path. Everybody's journey is unique because your life circumstances and who you are as a person is unique. When you work in a space that's not clearly defined in society, like, have to understand that the journey is not traditional because I am here to create the space for it. And I'm here to do it differently. And because of that, by definition, it's not going to look the same for everybody. And it's not going to look the same for me.
Yeah. And even if you do it again, it's going to be looking different as well, like the next time you decide to pivot.
Yes, because it evolves as we evolve. And even the conversation that we're having now, if we check in a year from now, there might be some changes. There probably will be some changes. And I think that's part of the process.
Yeah, like embracing it. Because a lot of the times when people come into this process and then I call them graduates, they graduate the career change and sort of they move into the next phase, is like, it feels like a completion of such a big process. And at the same time, it's very beginning for the rest of their lives. And there's going to be so many iterations of different types of challenges and change and collabs and pivots and moves and everything. But I feel like if we learn that foundational piece to what you are talking about, is like, listen, you can always go back to what you believe. You can always go back to the basics of food intake and water intake and regulating yourself. And when you're calmer and when you're taking care of yourself from that space, you can face almost anything in life.
And I would argue that that is the way. That I would argue that when you are getting ready to make fundamental change in your life, step one is taking it down to the basics. Even if you've been here before, even if you've done it before, it's go back to basics. And I remember there was a point in our journey where we had done a lot of work and I kind of got sidetracked or something happened. I still felt I went back to a state of being a bit scattered. And you said, okay, let's stop everything. Your nervous system is being triggered. This doesn't feel safe. Let's go back to basics. So instead of continuing this plan, let's take a pause. And that was huge because it's not that we were going in the wrong direction. It's just that I had to allow myself to catch up with all the changes.
Yeah. And also accepting your humanity, because there'll be days and weeks where you will like going through something, or sometimes when people are like, I couldn't do anything. And a lot of the times it's not just them being lazy. A lot of the times is that inner systems and content rearranging, adjusting to this new identity that they're embracing. And that needs quiet, sloth time. Sometimes we're like, I don't want to produce, I don't want to create. I love it. So is there anything else you wanted to share, or you're like, are these the main points?
I think those are the main points. Just honor your truth, honor your blueprints,
Yeah.
and watch the magic happen.
Yeah. So, the last question that I always ask, and I don't know if you already mentioned some of it, like I'd love to ask people is you're at this point, which is like the end, but also the beginning, and that will always forever be true wherever you are at. Is there some advice that you have for your past self, or maybe for those people who are wanting change, but also terrified of change, or have similar fears and beliefs that you had, which is like, I can't make it wrong. It has to be the one. I don't have a lot of time. What advice would you give to your past self and those people?
Um, I always wish I would have called you sooner. I would have found you sooner. That's one thing, because working, I found you at the right time, and working intentionally on this has been the biggest blessing. What I want to say is, especially to my past self, is like, someone out there needs your unique medicine just because of who you are and how you show up in the world. No other reason, just because of that basic fact. Somebody out there needs your medicine. When you replace the fear of change with curiosity, and you lead from a place of curiosity, you start aligning with your purpose. And the sooner you do that, the sooner you connect with the people that need to connect with you and that you need to connect with. You start living an expansive life. I wish that more than anything for everybody on this earth, if I could just gift that. I think that's the main thing, is gift yourself the opportunity to live an expansive life. That is healing in more ways than one. I have watched this. You say it's career change, but the holistic part of it is bigger than just the career change. This has impacted every area of my life, how I show up as a wife, as a family member, as a friend, as a colleague. It has impacted how I carry myself in the world. It's impacted how I respect my values and my boundaries. One thing that I do want to mention that I didn't mention, I should have mentioned this before, but you taught me the power of leading with the feminine and acting with your masculine energy. Everybody has this binary energy within them. And I was leading and acting with my masculine before I met you. And I was not honoring the feminine. The feminine part was missing in terms of how I conduct myself in business and in life. And what that means is there is an inherent knowledge within your body, within your system, that knows if this is aligned or misaligned. What you can hear it louder when you regulate your your nervous system, right? So that's why system regulation is so important, because then you actually hear the message. The message is not confusing. So once you hear the feminine, and the feminine says, okay, this is a go, this is a green light, the masculine takes over and starts bringing the action into it. That has been so powerful, so healing. So I feel like I'm honoring myself every step of the way. So my advice is just, if you decide not to take action, that is in and of itself a decision to stay the status quo. And if you're looking into career change, if you're looking into anything, any change in your life, it already means that something within you knows it is time for change. Something is not working. So gift yourself the opportunity to take action deliberately, not by default, not by being reactionary, but take deliberate action and gift yourself an expansive life. And that will ripple out to everybody around you.
Gosh, Nina, you're so good at this. I almost like, I'm just sitting there listening to you. I even forget that I need to ask you questions, because I'm like, I'm just here for the Nina show. You're so good at this. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. You said it so beautifully. I couldn't even say it myself. You're like, you want to take over my podcast? You're so good at this. Oh my goodness.
All things you helped me unlock. And I'm just saying, I'm like, I wish I could have Vilma forever, because you're just magical. And you really like, when I say you have unique medicine to offer to other people, well, that's what you've done. And thanks to you, I've been able to unlock things in my life and many other people.
Thank you so much. You know what? I'll tell you this. Thank you so much. I receive it full heart. What that was not the last question. Last question is like, what are you excited about right now when it comes to your career, your business, and how could people find you if they want to work with you? Like, give us all the details and just your plans.
Sure. So they can find me at griefandlight.com, or on Instagram, the handle is griefandlight. And the next plan is to formalize this into a full-time thing for me, right? So I've been in the pivoting, I've been in the shifting, I've been in the in the moving part of it, where I'm releasing the real estate side of things and I'm moving into the coaching side of things. So I've already been active. And now, before the end of the year, I know the holidays can be particularly difficult in grief and loss, and getting through them is extremely difficult. So I am offering a one-on-one consultation alongside with the monthly grief meetups. And you can find all that information on my website. So anybody who needs that extra support, who wants to lighten their path forward and start the new year in more solid ground, can contact me. I'd be more than happy to talk to you and see how we can work together, and just keep growing this beautiful work into a bigger offering of service to as many people as I possibly can. I think it is needed. I've received that validation, and I'm excited. I'm excited to see what else I can create from this. So there's a lot of things that I have grounded so far, and then there's a lot of unknown, and I'm very excited to dig into that next iteration of this work.
I love this. I think you're going to be amazing. You are amazing at this. And I think from here, you're only going to grow at the capacity that your nervous system needs. And I know you have a podcast, so we're going to leave all of the details in the show notes with a link. So if some of you need support, or someone you know who needs some support and they're in grief or lost someone, please feel free to reach out to Nina. She's amazing. You've heard it. I want to work with her. I'm not grieving yet. I hope I won't have to grieve soon, but I'm totally sold. I want to work with Nina. So thank you so much for joining me and joining the listeners. I love your story. I think your growth is phenomenal. And I think you're just becoming, and you already are, such a light in so many people's lives. So it was an honor to work with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bilma. It's an honor to work with you. You are a light yourself, and thank you for your gift as well.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for spending time with me today. If you resonate with this content, please subscribe and leave a little review to put a smile on my face. And if you'd like to take this work further and have my one-on-one support in switching to an aligned career path using my holistic career change method, make sure you head over to the show notes and book your free consultation call. I can't wait to meet you. Have a nice day.